Welcome to the channel, everybody. I'm excited you're here, and I'm excited to talk Star Wars. So to start out, I should say I'm a huge Star Wars fan. I have been for a very, very long time, since I was a little kid, and I also really like to read. And funny thing about that, this actually just kind of came to me. I really probably started to enjoy reading because of Star Wars. I remember as a kid that I enjoyed the fact that I knew how to read. It was kind of difficult for me. I read kind of slow at first. It was difficult for me to focus sometimes, but my parents were amazing and they encouraged me to read, as they should have. It's good for you. I truly believe that. But I was allowed to go to the library and kind of pick whatever book I wanted, not just school books. You know, as a kid, sometimes you like certain subjects, you don't like certain other ones, but the opportunity to read something other than just a school book, that was a cool thing for me as well. So I was a big Batman fan and Star Wars and all this stuff. When I had the realization, again, at a very young age, that there were Star Wars books, I was like, what? Why didn't someone tell me sooner? So I started with the Young Jedi Knights series and read all of those. Love them, they're so much fun. And it introduced me to a whole bunch of characters that now are considered like legends or EU. They're not a part of the Disney continuity timeline, but they're still beloved characters by so many people. And in this series that I read, it focused a lot on Jacen and Jaina Solo, the twins that were born to Han and Leia. So over the years, I've read a handful of, various Star Wars books, some from the Clone Wars series, what have you. But during this whole process, I've been slowly making my way through the new Jedi Order series, which I enjoy a lot because it kind of takes place not too long after the Young Jedi Knight series. So a lot of my favorite characters that I already know and love make their appearance throughout this series. Now, I've been reading it much longer than I care to admit. It's been years, guys. But again, I'm at a point where I really do like reading, so I read a lot of other books. So I kind of work them in between other books. And part of that is to keep it fresh for me too. Like, as much as I love Star Wars, there's a lot of similar words and jargon that gets thrown around a lot, and that's not a bad thing. It keeps you in that world, but sometimes I just gotta branch out. That being said, I just finished the 5th book in the series, which is Agents of Chaos 2, Jedi Eclipse. It's like a 19-book series, and I believe there's even 1 or 2 ebooks thrown in there somewhere. But this book, I really enjoyed it. I'll give you kind of a brief premise of the series as a whole, and then I'll dive into this book as well as my thoughts. And I'll do my best to not give any spoilers. It's a really long series and it's really old, so if I do, please, I hope you will forgive me. So the new Jedi Order is essentially Luke Skywalker, Jedi Master. He's married to Mara Jade, and she's in other book series as well. Again, this is all Legends content if you've never heard of these characters. So that's the other thing. At least it doesn't strictly spoil the Disney stuff if you're into the Disney stuff. So Luke is trying to rebuild the Jedi Order. So his nephews and niece, Jacen, Jaina, and Anakin Solo, they're all training and they're Jedi Knights. And Leia is an ambassador who serves the New Republic. Han Solo, he's known as General Han Solo, and he helps out with the New Republic as well. So things that you might expect if you've seen the end of Return of the Jedi or read some of the other books shortly after Return of the Jedi. Now, there's this huge invasion from this alien species called the Yuuzhan Vong, or Yuuzhan Vong, however you want to say it. And they're from a totally different galaxy. And this is wild because what they've come to find out is that they have sent spies and kind of scouted out the galaxy and the core and Coruscant and Corellia and all their system. And they've been planning an invasion. So when they come, no one is expecting it. And part of the reason what makes this so crazy is their forces are massive and they're very, very powerful with their technology, which is weird to say technology because they actually kind of hate technology. Their spaceships and all of their weapons are bioengineered. So all of their technology is organic. It's like a living thing. And they're these crazy, orc looking goblin type beings, and they have these gods that they worship and these priests. Part of the way they do that is they cut themselves and bruise themselves and tattoos and piercings, and they just kind of horrifyingly uglify themselves as a part of their worship and the way they demarcate themselves in terms of warrior class or other types of classes. And so that's not the only thing that makes them a huge threat or really scary. They come to find out that they silence the Force around the Jedi, basically. The Jedi can't really sense them in the Force. And it's weird, and forgive me if I get some of this wrong, because again, I read them over several years and I forget things. And I don't think it's strictly that the Jedi can't use the Force while they're around them. It's just kind of suppressed, and they can't really sense them or reach out in the Force like they normally can. Take that explanation as you will. Dive into the books. It makes sense when I read it. So there's been several things leading up to this point. There's been several devastating attacks on planets that are involved within the New Republic. So there's been massive losses and tragedy involving some of our favorite heroes even, and that causes them to have tension among their own personal relationships with their family. Han Solo being one of them. He's struggling a lot in this series, and at this point in this book, he's getting to the point where that grief and that frustration hasn't totally subsided, but he's working through it more. So that's nice. I enjoyed that about this book. So in Jedi Eclipse, it starts out with a bang. There's an attack on this planet. I believe it's called Gindine. And Leia is kind of in charge of like taking people from these places, like the refugees, and getting them safe somewhere else. So that's been a huge part of what she's trying to do, as well as like talk to generals and people in the Senate and figure out what they should do, like if they should recruit certain worlds into this war, how they're gonna do that, who's on which side. It starts out with evacuations and just kind of goes from there. And we touch on her story as she goes to the Hapens to kind of see if they want to help out the New Republic, their consortium. Han has a co-pilot with him named Droma, who is a Rin, and they're trying to find his family, who are also refugees. So he's bouncing around, and Leia doesn't really know where he is. She's always concerned for his safety. Jaina, their daughter, she's in this book, but kind of briefly, and she's part of Rogue Squadron. So an elite, fighting force, and they're getting prepared for what's next and where they're gonna go. Jason and Anakin are at the Jedi Temple with Luke, and they've been assigned to this task to go to Centerpoint Station, which is in the Corellia system, and there's a huge weapon there that could cause massive damage to the Yuuzhan Vong, but it's on the scale of something like the Death Star, and technically like more powerful than the Death Star. So there's the moral conundrum of like, do we turn this weapon on? Do we use it for defense or force? And Anakin plays a big part in that, because however the technology works, it's like imprinted on him. So he's actually crucial to turning it on. So there's a lot of interesting facets there and tension between Jason and Anakin, and the right and the wrong thing to do. Also, the Hutts play a pretty big part in this book as well, in terms of whose side are they on. And so you get these scenes where the Yuuzhan Vong are meeting with the Hutts because they know that they're gangsters and that they might work to their advantage, because the Hutts control a lot of different sectors and they transport, spice and other things to those sectors. They put on kind of this facade of like, yeah, we'll work with you, but the Yuuzhan Vong have like no intention of really working with anybody. They'll do it only as far as they need to just completely destroy everything and rework everything in their own bioengineered organic lifestyle. But it is interesting to read those conversations and like kind of wonder for yourself, like, are the Hutts going to betray them? Are they going to leak information to the New Republic and help them out? Because they might come to a point where they realize, oh yeah, like they're eventually going to destroy us as well. So you're kind of wondering who's going to leak information, if they're going to, when, all that fun stuff. So James Luceno, who wrote this one, I think does a good job of kind of keeping you on your toes of who's going to do what. And during all this time, there's senators and there's meetings of like the New Republic and discussion of what they're going to do. There's the senator, I believe her name is like Vicky Shesh or something like that. And she's always playing politics, and you're always wondering, okay, is she really in this to help the New Republic, or does she have some other sinister motivation? You're not quite sure of what she wants in the book until kind of near the end. It's made a little more clear. I'm still not totally sure, but I have suspicion of her motivation. So I remember thinking as I was reading this that kind of in the middle point, I was like, there's not a whole lot of action. I was like, I kind of want to see a little more action, but that's not entirely true as I thought about it. Because it opens up with a bunch, this massive like battle sequence on this planet, refugees escaping, so that is interesting. And then there's a point where Leia is trying to recruit Prince Isildur and the consortium, and they have like this honor duel, which was a fun thing to read about and kind of just see how the rules were set up for it. So that was interesting. Even so, even if I would say there's not like a ton of action in the book, there's a good flow to it. I feel like there's good pacing jumping between all the scenes of the different characters of like Han and Droma, Leia and the Hapens, and Jason and Anakin, and, you know, Kip Duron and Talon Card. Kip is a Jedi, and he's kind of fractured a little bit from Luke in terms of ideology because of all these attacks and how to properly handle it. But he's got his own like squadron of fighter pilots, and they're still at least unified on the idea that they have to stop the Yuuzhan Vong. So to me, I felt like the pacing was good going between all these characters and their stories. And then by the time we get to the end, once again, it's very action-packed. And I felt like he did a good job of using those character stories and where they were traveling to and what they were trying to accomplish to get to that kind of action piece at the end. So I did appreciate that. It didn't seem gratuitous. It didn't seem out of nowhere. So to me, again, that made a good flow for the story and logical sense, and yeah, hope for victory and all those things. In terms of James' like writing style, I really enjoyed it. It's hard for me sometimes, like I said, I've read these over several years, to remember everyone's style. And he wrote the one before this too, because this is like a part 2, so Agents of Chaos 1, Agents of Chaos 2. But I like his style. It's very readable, because sometimes in Star Wars books, I feel like you can get bogged down a little bit by too much like fantasy jargon. And like, I get they're trying to give you an image of the world, but sometimes they're like made up words, which again isn't bad, but when you're using so many of them like kind of back to back, it's like, okay, just tell me I'm in a spaceship. You know, like just tell me that they're in the room next to this room or whatever. It's like, I think sometimes the books can get too technical and overly descriptive, and there's not a lot of like character progression or dialogue or action. I think he has a good balance, and I think the way he writes the dialogue, it flows really well. He does a good job with kind of trying to insert humor. Like when I read Han, it's hard to like mimic, you know, Harrison Ford's like performance, if you will, on paper, which is obviously a mashup of his performance and George Lucas's writing. But I think he does a good job of like, as I'm reading this, I'm like, yeah, that sounds like something Han would probably say. So I enjoyed his writing style. It was very readable. And like I said, when the thought crossed my mind that there's not a ton of action going on in the middle, which again wasn't totally true, it didn't really matter, because what was happening was still interesting in the way he described those things and the way he had the characters interact with each other. And like I said, he did a good job of setting things up for later events, which unfortunately I don't think all Star Wars authors are very good at doing sometimes. It's like, okay, well, I need to fill some pages, so they're just going to be on this planet for a long time until I need to move them over here to these other characters. I feel like everything kind of had a purpose, which was nice. So thoughts moving forward with the series. I'm excited to keep going. I was talking to my friend who's a big fan of these books as well. He's read them all. He's actually read them more than once. Like I said, a little bit of a slow reader here. But he loves them, and I told him I just finished this one, so we're talking like, oh yeah, I like this, I like that, I like this character, and he's like, wait till you get to this book. He's like, if you really like this character, this book's gonna be really good for you. He's like, this one, most fans consider the best one, like all this. It's just fun to talk about. And I'm excited to keep pushing through on this series. As I finish them, I'll bring you more reviews and we can talk. You know, leave your comments down below if you've read these books, if you've heard about them, interested in them, favorite characters. I'd love to know all that stuff. I love nerding out on all these things with you guys. Now, in terms of recommendation, would I recommend this book? Yeah, I would, especially if you're a Star Wars fan. Now, I haven't read any of the new Star Wars books, like since Disney bought Star Wars. I'm not saying they're bad. I've heard some of them are pretty good. I heard the Ahsoka one was pretty good. I haven't read any of them though. But in terms of the new Jedi Order, if you're thinking maybe, well, but why would I read that? It's not part of like the continuity or something like that. It's like, I would say do your best to ignore that thought, especially if you like Star Wars, because these are really, really good. And I'm not trying to be a hater here. Disney has made several things that I really do enjoy. With that being said, it hasn't been my favorite era of Star Wars storytelling. I think these books, honestly, I think they're much better than the sequel trilogy. Again, I'm not trying to be a sequel trilogy hater here. There are things and characters in those films that I do personally enjoy. But it's not my favorite. It's not my favorite trilogy. It doesn't mean I hate it. But just honest opinion, I really like these characters and I really like the story. I think it's just more fleshed out. There's more background to the characters. Things just, they seem more logical in terms of like Force ability and power and sensitivity and the dynamics of the New Republic and remnants of the Empire and things like that. It just, to me, it makes more sense. It's more fleshed out and it's just more interesting. I think it's a bit more complex and in a good way, not hard to understand. So yeah, highly recommend this. If you're wondering, like, I know that they've reprinted these books. I don't know if you can still get the reprints on like StarWars.com or whatever. But you can always try to buy them on like other used book websites, or if you have like a local half-price books. I know not every place has a half-price books, but it's a wonderful store. You can go in and they sell books for half price, generally. But sometimes they also have a clearance section. I found a lot of my Star Wars books in the clearance section for very cheap. Now, that's obviously going to be harder to find them all in order. So if you're a stickler for doing in order, you're probably going to have to use some websites. But I think these books in this series, especially if you have like at least probably even an average, but at least above, like a slightly above average knowledge of Star Wars than like the normal fan, you could probably pick up one of these books kind of out of anywhere. You might have to do a little bit of like, Googling, Wikipedia, and just kind of like search some of the characters and plot lines a little bit if you want to try and get yourself like caught up. These books are written in a way to where, like I said, if you kind of read the overall premise of the series, have a basic understanding of the characters, you can still enjoy this book, like if you were to just pick this one up from the start. To each his own. You may disagree if you've read this series before. Again, let me know if you're like, oh, that's the worst way to read it. Let me know. Let the people know. But I feel like fans and readers, are smart enough to be able to kind of get themselves grounded a little bit with like extracurricular knowledge and kind of dive in anywhere if they have to. Like if that's all they can do is buy them randomly, I still think they're worth the read. So thanks for sticking around through the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed this review. If you did, please let me know. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Like I said, I love getting conversations started with you guys. Feel free to let me know if you want more Star Wars book reviews or just book reviews in general, or even movie reviews. If you're new to this channel, that's a big thing here. I'm a filmmaker, actor, storyteller, and I love diving into the meaning and purpose of stories. And I think there's a lot of value in the Star Wars franchise and the hero's journey and overcoming adversity and right versus wrong. So if you found this review entertaining or helpful, please do me a huge favor. Please like, share, and subscribe. It really, really helps my channel a lot. As always, guys, thank you so much for your time. It really means a lot to me. I appreciate all of you, and I'll see you in the next video.